Hello, I'm Ollie, and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, I want to talk about great books and whether or not they need to be enjoyable. So I've talked in the past in these Sunday videos about what I guess is kind of the reverse of this question, which is the question of whether quote unquote bad books can be enjoyable. And my conclusion on that is 100% yes. Books which do not necessarily have literary merit can be fantastically enjoyable, can be very meaningful for their readers, and should be applauded for that and enjoyed for what they are. Um, but the reverse of that question, then, and I've been thinking about this because I'm about to, or am embarking on a year of trying to read some classic books, is whether or not books that are perceived as great books by society have to be enjoyable. Um, and I think the really obvious answer to that question is no, they don't have to be enjoyable. But I think it's a little bit more complex than that. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I think the first question we need to discuss, though, is what is enjoyment? And clearly, everybody enjoys different types of books and other forms of entertainment as well. So I enjoy, particularly enjoy crime and horror fiction, which tend to be about the darker side of life. And there are many people who hate reading that kind of thing, but I enjoy it and even at times find comfort in it. And clearly, there is a huge market, and I don't know if it's just at the moment or if it's always been there, but there seems at the moment to be a huge market for kind of true life books, which are about people going through horrific traumas and coming out the other side of them. So that is something that I personally would not like to read, but they clearly have their fans. So there are clearly people out there who get quote unquote enjoyment out of that kind of book. And I think enjoyment is maybe it's the wrong word to use for this discussion, but I can't think of a better one. Because enjoyment kind of suggests fun and laughter and all those things, and that's definitely not necessarily what people get out of reading books about dark things. But they do get something out of them. There is something in those books, in the crime and horror books that I read, in the traumatic books that other people, enjoy, that speaks to something inside them and gives you some kind of fulfillment which you are seeking in your entertainment life. And it may just be a distraction from the real life trauma, of day-to-day existence, or it may be something different. But clearly, different people enjoy different things about different books. So, does that mean that we have to find something like that in a classic book to enjoy it? And I think one of the perceptions that people have about classic books is that they can be really hard going, both in terms of the language that they use, particularly if they are older books, but also in terms of the kind of depth of their subject matter. And that's something I'm really interested to get into as I go through this year of reading classics, is whether or not some of these apparently daunting books like War and Peace or something like that, which I'm going to be reading, are really daunting, or whether once you get into them they are stories, enjoyable stories. And I expect some of the books to be that I'm going to be reading to be very difficult, but I expect others of them, and I would count War and Peace in this based on what I've heard about it, to be an enjoyable story. So to go back to the point at the start about trashy books, the fact that a book doesn't have literary merit doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. But equally, I think the fact that a book does have literary merit doesn't mean it has to be enjoyable. And I think that we as readers can all appreciate the fact that a book may be a great book and may have literary merit, but we may personally not enjoy it at all. To bring this back to a more topical example, and this is what kind of started my brain ticking over on all of this in the first place, Lord of the Rings. So I read, in the last few months, I read the first two Lord of the Rings books. I really liked Fellowship of the Ring. And I really liked half of The Two Towers. So The Two Towers, if you've not read it, it's kind of got two different storylines going on throughout it. One of which is about Frodo kind of, travelling across the land, and one of which is about Gandalf wandering around trying to get, kind of doing politics and trying to get a force of people united. And I found the Frodo story really enjoyable, and the Gandalf story really, really dull, to the extent that I haven't picked up the final book. So I haven't picked up Return of the King. I just can't be bothered because I'm too worried that it's going to be like the boring half of The Two Towers. Conversely, I'm watching Rings of Power on TV at the moment on Amazon. So I've watched the first 3 episodes and I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it. I think it's fantastically enjoyable. I know a lot of kind of die-hard Tolkien fans may have different views, but I think it's a fantastically made show. It's completely gripped me, and I'm loving every minute of it. In a way that I definitely didn't love every minute of The Two Towers. But I think the greatness of Tolkien's work is indisputable, and clearly, fantasy, epic fantasy as we know it today would not exist without Tolkien in the form that it does. And part of the genius of Tolkien is the depth of his world building. But equally, that's one of the things I really disliked about The Two Towers in particular is, all the songs and stuff like that. Just, for me, just distract from the story and slow things down to the extent that they become an impediment to my enjoyment of the book. Whereas Rings of Power doesn't have any of that crap, it just gets on with the story. But clearly, well, not clearly, it seems to me that the Rings of Power is not something that we will consider in years to come a great work of television. We may consider it to be a very enjoyable series and so on and so forth, and clearly so far it seems to be that. But it's not going to be a foundational work in the same way that Lord of the Rings is, and partly that is purely because it is based on someone else's work. So one of the criteria that we came up with as a group for Garb August, as a signifier that something might be trash, is something that something that is based on something else. So a novelisation or a TV Time book or that kind of thing. So Rings of Power is it's the opposite of that. It's a TV extension of the Lord of the Rings universe, the Middle-earth universe that Tolkien created. But clearly there can be films, and I don't know if this is so true for TV shows. I can't think of a TV show off the top of my head. But there are films which were based on books, which are classics. So, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for example, is a classic film that stands tall in its own right next to the book. Now, clearly, it couldn't exist without the book, but somehow it manages to be a classic, despite the fact that it is not an original work. And I'm wondering now why that is. I'm wondering why film can do that, and maybe it's because it's such a different medium to literature that the things that it brings to the story and the talent and ingenuity and brilliance that you can show in a film are so different from what you can show in a book that a film, even when based on a book, can still be a classic. I feel like I've digressed a bit off my original point here. So there were two other, there's been a couple of videos on BookTube recently, which kind of, I think, are flirting around the same question. So Mark from Book Time with Elvis put up a video a couple of days ago talking about good, bad books. So looking at a George Orwell essay. And Matt Wall, Paperback Junkie, did a video the other day about classics and about how we should all read what we want to read and not feel obliged or persuaded is maybe the wrong word, not feel compelled to read classics just because people talk about them on BookTube a lot. And we should get away from this notion of there being books which you have to read in order to be a grounded reader. And I 100% agree with that. I don't think that there are any books that you have to read. I think you should just read what you enjoy. I'm embarking on my own, quest through the classics, if you like, because I think it will be interesting, because I like to challenge myself to read different things, and these are not books that I would read otherwise. But equally, if I don't enjoy them, I will be quite prepared to swiftly DNF them, as I did with Pride and Prejudice. So, to get back to that first question, does the fact that readers may not enjoy a book mean that it isn't a classic? Mean that it doesn't have value? No, I don't think it does. But I'm really interested to hear other people's views on this. I think it's something of a nuanced question, because I think that we tend in the modern world, when we have so many pressures on our time, to turn to books as a source of enjoyment. And certainly 100% I do. Books are, reading is my main leisure activity. So I want to read books that I enjoy. But that doesn't mean that I necessarily equate enjoyment with quality. So, I read a lot of books which it would be hard to argue are of high quality, but which I get a huge amount of enjoyment out of. So I'm really interested to see with some of the classics I'm going to be reading, whether or not I do enjoy them, and whether or not the enjoyment aspect of them is one of the things that has made them into classics. So there are some books, and I'm probably thinking here mostly about like early 20th century books, or maybe something like Moby Dick, which I've just read. But something, an author like William Faulkner, who is very challenging. Clearly some people get enjoyment out of his works, but I don't think, I'm not sure there's a huge mass of people who get enjoyment out of his works. Whereas if you think about older classics, like, so authors like Homer, like Dickens, like Victor Hugo, these are people who wrote books that were enjoyed by the masses at the time that they were published. And I think that published is probably the wrong word to use for Homer, but you know what I mean. These were books that were designed to be entertaining to the people that were around at the time they were written. And so their longevity, I would argue, to an extent, is because there was a groundswell of appreciation of them at the time. And they also have, because clearly, at the time Dickens was writing, loads of other people were writing too, and a lot of those books had not lasted in the way that his work has. So there's clearly, they have something extra to them, they have some additional quality, which has meant that succeeding generations have also found that enjoyment in them, that pleasure in them, and that's what has allowed them to continue, rather than someone like Faulkner, who, and I say this not having read Faulkner, I DNF'd As I Lay Dying a little while ago, or a couple of years ago. I am going to try it again this month. But it seems to me someone like Faulkner, who is deliberately experimental and challenging in his writing, is someone whose work is considered classic because of that, rather than because it has been consistently enjoyed by generations of people. So he's almost like an author that people admire, rather than an author that people enjoy. Anyway, I've rambled on enough. Do let me know in the comments what you think. Do let me know if you disagree with everything I've said, which is entirely possible. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do classics have to be enjoyable to individuals or to a wide range of people in order to be, to continue to be classics? Or can there be something else there that allows them to be classics without people necessarily enjoying reading them? Let me know what you think. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. I hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.